everyone, this is Brittany and I'm doing my presentation mobily. I actually did my interview on my boyfriend's grandpa, George Thurza, who is a refugee from war from Hungary. He came here in the 1950s, post-World War II. In Hungary, the economy was in complete shambles, and his dad was a realist and realized that they would never make it if they stayed. And so what they did was, in the middle of the night, they took a train. They made it through a few refugee concentration type camps where they were in hiding, and then they finally made it to Austria, where a Lutheran church sponsored them and flew them to the United States. His grandpa was actually 10 when this happened, and it took about a month and a half for them to finally make it, where they were placed in St. Louis, and that is where George grew up. If you look at these pictures here, this is actually his birth certificate, his papers getting U.S. citizenship, and then also his military ID card. Some of the things that we talked about that we have discussed in the class: microculture. So obviously there's barely any Hungarians in the United States today, especially refugees of war, especially post-World War II. I was interested to know when they came if there was any stereotypes, because like I said, there was barely anyone here, and they also were living in Section 2 housing. That's all the church could afford to put them in when they came. And he said they actually there weren't any stereotypes here, because unlike other people, they didn't look dramatically different from anyone else. They were white, they didn't speak English, but they could easily blend well. So he said that's one of the reasons why they were so successful, and that he has had many of the successes he has had in his life. But there were contemptuous prejudices because they were so poor. They did grow up, like I said, in Section 2 housing. They didn't have good jobs. They had factory jobs. They didn't have to speak English, but luckily for George, his parents integrated him very well and got him speaking English. He had a lot of American friends, so he was actually able to become more successful than most people you would think today. He actually graduated from NKU with a master's in business. He worked for Great American Insurance for 37 years, and he was also in the U.S. military for 7 years. One big thing we talked about was ethnocentrism. He did grow up during the time of Hitler and Stalin, so he said he can remember as a child having tanks drive up and down his street back in Hungary. So obviously his family, they were Lutheran. They didn't fit in with everyone else, mainly the Catholics in Hungary. And it was obviously Hitler and Stalin who wanted to wipe out races all across the world. Another thing that we talked about was the ability and opportunity. We talked about that in our last class, how it's hard to learn English if you don't have a lot of money, and that's one thing that he really hit on. He was very privileged because he got to experience American culture simply because he looked white, as sad as that sounds.